Hey guys, this is Alan from Queen Creek Tropicals, and in today's episode, I'm going to talk about everything you need to know about henna plant, from growing requirements, up potting, watering, fertilization, type of root system, how much sun it needs, winter protection, everything that you need to know to be successful growing this plant anywhere in the world. Obviously, if you live in a tropical environment, it's going to be a lot easier for you to grow this plant than somebody living in Alaska. But you know what? It's doable, and today I'm going to show you exactly how you can do that. Okay guys, let's talk about the henna plant itself. Why is this plant popular? Can you eat it? No, you cannot eat it. Now, this plant right here is used for the dye you can actually get from the leaves. You dry the leaves, you mix them with water, you crush it around, and then you get a dye. This plant specifically will give you a dye that is brownish, reddish color. And it's very popular in Indian culture. The other name for this plant is also Mehandi, or the dye tree, or the dye plant, Egyptian tree. It has all kinds of different names out there, but regardless of what you know as, henna plant is going to be the most common name. So usually the dye from this plant, you can use it to dye your hair, but you can also use it to to tattoo yourself with temporary tattoos. Actually, here locally we have a tattoo artist, and she actually gets a henna dye, and she does tattoos right here locally. It's amazing. She works very fast, and she can get a tattoo, like a hand tattoo, done in like 10-15 minutes. It's amazing how fast she works. But usually the tattooing part of it is mainly popular in ceremonies like weddings and then birthdays. But anyways, another use for this plant right here is also medicinal. I haven't tried it yet, but what people have told me is if it's really hot outside, all you gotta do is get some henna powder and then just get it on your hands. It doesn't matter where you put it, on your hands, on your arms, your face. Just get some of the powder on yourself, like stain your skin with it, and then it will automatically cool you off. I have a customer, and she told me when she was a little kid, and during the summer months in India, her mom used to actually get some henna powder, and she will make her stick her fingers in the powder itself during the summer so that she could go to sleep at night, because over there it's very hot and they didn't have air conditioning. So after she put her fingers in the powder and she got the henna dye on her fingers, it gave her a cooling sensation and allowed her to sleep during the night, even when it was like 100 degrees. I don't know how true that is, but I heard that testimony from several people, several friends that we have from India. So I guess it has to be true. I'm gonna have to try it myself. If you tried it before yourself, just go ahead and comment below and let me know your experiences on the medicinal value of this plant. But anyways guys, let's talk about the growing requirements. When is the best time to plant it? The best time to plant this plant in the ground, it's going to be when your night temperatures are at least 50 degrees every single night, and expected to rise in the next month or so. What that means, guys, that means late spring through the summer through maybe early fall, depending on your fall night temperatures. It's all about the night temperatures. Do not even think about your day temperatures, guys, because they are irrelevant. If your night temperatures are cold, this plant is not going to grow. If you live in an area where your ground freezes in the winter time, I do not recommend you to plant it in the ground because it may be a little too cold for you, and it's going to be very challenging growing this plant, which is a tropical plant, in an area where you get freezing temperatures long enough to freeze your soil. Now, if your lowest temperature it's in the low 20s, like in my area, zone 9B, but to be honest, in my immediate area, about 3-mile radius, I get 10 degrees colder than the forecast, so I'm technically zone A, 9A in my area, immediate microclimate in my neighborhood. I get in the low 20s very often, and then as long as I keep the frost and the cold wind away from this plant, I'm good to go in the winter time. So the best time to plant it, remember, it's gonna be when your night temperatures are 50 degrees consistently every single night, and expect it to rise in the next month or so. Do not plant it too early and do not plant it too late. And I will tell you more about it in a few minutes. Let's talk about the sun requirements. This plant requires full sun anywhere in the United States. It takes full sun here in Arizona, 120 degrees, from sunrise to sunset, no issues at all. Do not plant it in the shade. They do not like to be too shaded, guys. It will not grow as well in the shade. It needs the sun to grow. So full sun anywhere. If it takes full sun in my area, it will take full sun in your area. Let's talk about the winter protection. And this is gonna be the most important part out of everything I tell you today. Winter protection, guys. This plant in my area, it's frost sensitive. If you wanna know the difference between frost sensitive and cold sensitive, I have several videos talking specifically about those, but to give you a quick summary, frost sensitivity is gonna be ice on the plant. Cold sensitivity is actually gonna be the ambient temperature around the plant. This plant right here will take easily in the low 20s, prolonged exposure in the low 20s, no problem, as long as you protect your plant from the cold wind and frost. If ice touches this plant right here, guys, it will damage whatever ice touches. If your plant is small, like this one right here, and it takes frost damage, it will definitely kill your plant. Obviously, bigger plants like this over here, they have a little bigger root system, so the plants are a little stronger. So these guys, depending on how much ice they get on them, they will die back somewhat, and they may come back in the summer actually. But you don't want your plant to suffer in the winter time, because if it does, it will set you back easily 6 months to a year every single time that it takes damage in the winter time. Now this plant right here, guys, it's semi-deciduous. So what that means is when it gets cold, usually as soon as you start dropping in the low 30s, even in the 20s, all your leaves are gonna fall off in the winter time. So that is natural, that is normal, and that usually happens in areas where you get that cold. If you're in a tropical environment, this plant may not drop its leaf in the winter time. It may stay evergreen throughout the whole winter. But for that to happen, it requires warm temperatures, which obviously we're not gonna get that here in the desert, guys. We get cold here. So every year our plants drop all their leaves. Now let's talk about the type of root system of this plant. This plant right here, guys, it has a shallow root system, but it's not just shallow, it's also fibrous. So what that means is, let me show you. You're gonna get a lot of hair-like roots like this one right here. And then the plant is just gonna completely cover the soil with roots like this. So it's not invasive. It's safe to plant close to structures like sidewalks and walls in your house, because the root system is not gonna be invasive enough to completely destroy everything. They're very small and very delicate, so fibrous root system. Now let's talk about the structure of the plant. This right here, it's a bush, it's a shrub, guys. It's not a tree. It will grow between 8 to 15 feet tall, depending on in your area. The warmer your temperatures are, the longer they are throughout the year, the taller your plant's going to grow. Now, if you get colder, or your night temperatures are actually cooler, meaning you stay maybe 60, 70 degrees consistently and you don't really get that hot, then this plant will stay smaller in your area. It's not gonna grow that big. Let's talk about watering. Anytime you have a root system like this one right here, fibrous, shallow roots, you need to water very frequently, guys. The main challenge we have about growing this plant here in the desert, it's not so much the winter, it's watering. A lot of people don't realize, but you need to water your plants. A little plant like this, guys, right now in my area, it is August right now, and then my daily temperatures are over 100 degrees every single day. This little plant right here has a smaller root ball than this one right here. So this little guy, it's drying out on me about 3 times a day. So I have to water it 3 times a day. If I miss watering 1 or 2 times, that's all it takes to kill this plant. They are very sensitive to going dry, guys, especially in the sun. In the sun, all it takes a few hours of this plant going dry and it will die. The good thing about the root system of this plant, guys, is it's small, so it's extremely hard to overwater. I have never killed a henna plant from overwatering. I literally keep these plants wet right now because it's better for me to keep them wet than to keep them dry, because wetness takes months to kill your henna, and it usually only happens during the winter time when your plant loses all its leaves and the soil stays too wet. Then obviously over the months, the cold, the lack of evaporation, your plant's not growing, usually you get root rot and then your plant may rot away. But that only happens in the winter time. During the growing season, guys, I keep them wet, especially if your daily temperatures are hot, because these little guys right here, they die very quickly. So if you have a henna plant, guys, in the ground, you keep it moist, especially during the first summer. If you have a little plant like this and you put it in the ground, the first summer, my recommendation is for you, for the first few days after you have planted it in the ground, go out there and fill the root ball right here next to the trunk and make sure that it's wet every single day during the growing season. Do not let it dry. If you let this dry, it will die. Obviously, bigger plants, they can go dry a little longer just because they have a bigger root system, and they also have a lot more potting mix holding water. So those guys, obviously, they're not going to die immediately, but obviously if you don't water, they will die, especially in containers. Now let's talk about feeding your plant, or how do you fertilize this plant. It's very easy, guys. In containers, we use a slow release fertilizer. I'll post a picture right now on the screen to show you exactly what type of fertilizer we use. The numbers are irrelevant. The only reason we use that fertilizer is because, for one, we can buy it very easily locally, and two, it's a slow release fertilizer. So we put it in the containers, and then based on the temperatures and how much you water, it will release the fertilizer slowly into the potting mix, feeding your plant throughout the growing season. Very easy to do. In the ground, the way we fertilize our henna plants, we simply use compost and mulch. We put a layer of compost around the root ball and then a layer of mulch. The mulch is to keep the compost moist, because if compost is not moist, or it's not gonna work, because you're actually indirectly feeding the living organisms in the soil, and they are the ones that actually feed your plant, because they eat all that compost, then they poop. Now their poop is small enough, when mixed with water, that water penetrates the soil, it touches the root system of your plant, and through osmosis, then the plant can actually absorb the nutrients from within that water. So that's why it's very important for you to keep the compost moist, because if it's not moist, then there's no life in there, and then it's just sitting there doing nothing for you and not feeding your plant. What else can we talk about? Okay, container growing, guys. Can you grow this plant in a container? Yes, you can. Can you grow it indefinitely? Well, that depends, guys. Plants are just like you and I. As they get bigger, you and I buy bigger clothes. Well, for plants, you are going to need to pot it. Now, these little plants right here, they are root bound. How do I know that? Because they're drying out way too often, way too quickly on me, so it's very hard for me to keep them watered. That's a sign for you to pot your plant. Now, when potting your plant, I'm going to show you that in just a few minutes, so you know exactly what to do when potting your plant. But yes, you can grow it in a container. You just have to make sure you take care of it. And no, you cannot put this little plant in a huge container, so that way you don't have to water it as often, or it's going to grow fast. Because this plant right here will not grow up until it's fully rooted in the current container it's in. So you want your plant to be fully rooted in there, you want it to grow some, and then you want to pot it. When potting your plant, obviously you want to go a few inches wider, and then a few inches deeper, and then obviously it's going to take probably a year to fully root itself in the ground, and then obviously you're going to have to keep potting it. But yeah, this plant is doable in a container, especially in areas where it gets really cold in the winter time, because otherwise if you put it in the ground, unless you use a heater, it's just not gonna work. If you get in, in the lower teens or single digits, that's way too cold, and that's going to kill your plant, regardless of the size your plant is in. Another misconception, guys, is I'm just gonna buy a bigger plant because it's actually going to take more cold than a little plant. In reality, that may be true, just a tiny bit, but this plant right here will die just as quickly, maybe not as quickly as this one here in the winter if it gets extremely cold. Low 20s, these two plants right here can tolerate it. But you get colder than that, at that point it doesn't matter what size your plant is, it's still going to die. Obviously, in containers, your plant is not able to fully root itself in the ground 100%. So what that means is your plant in a container will never be as strong as one that is fully rooted in the ground. Once you plant this tree in the ground, it will take easily, at least depending on your temperatures, 1 full year in the ground to fully root itself in the ground. So for that time, your plant's gonna be sensitive to going dry, it's gonna be more sensitive to the cold, to the frost. So make sure you take care of it for at least the first year. If it's the first season in the ground, guys, I recommend you to frost protect your plant really well, make sure you water well, and then you will be successful. So I believe I covered everything that you need to know about the growing conditions and requirements for this plant. Now here it's an additional personal tip about growing this plant that I have learned over the years. The first one, guys, is this plant will only grow when your night temperatures are hot. The hotter your night temperatures, the faster this plant will grow. This plant right here is the first one to go to sleep in the winter time. It will lose all its foliage in the winter when it gets cold, usually as soon as we start getting in the low 30s. Now that is normal, that is not gonna kill your plant. So remember, when your plant has no leaves, completely cut back the watering and only water when your plant is fully dry, and do not keep it wet. If this stays wet for over a week in between watering in the winter time, that is too much water, guys, and that is too long, and you may get overwatering issues over the months. So make sure it dries out in between watering. Now, like I said, this plant requires hot night temperatures. So usually this plant right here will look like a stick all the way from early spring to maybe early summer. So spring here is usually, you know, April, and then and these plants are the last ones to wake up. And the reason for that is, well, are the night temperatures, guys, because we really don't get hot enough at night for this plant to start growing until around May. What's hot enough? If your temperatures are consistently 60 degrees, you will see some growth on this plant. Not as much though, and it's not gonna grow as fast. As soon as you start hitting 70, 80, even 90 degrees, this plant grows like a weed. But the problem for me is our growing season is not that long, even though I get sunlight here all year around. And it doesn't matter if my day temperatures are hot, because if my night temperatures are cold, this plant is not going to grow. So my growing season for this plant specifically is usually late May all the way through maybe September. And then as soon as we start getting closer to the winter time, growing season is over, and these plants shut down and they don't like to grow much, regardless of how much you water or how much you fertilize it. There's no way you can overcome heat, temperature. So if you get hot during daytime and cold at night, this plant is not going to do well, guys. Just keep that in mind. Can you grow this plant indoors? Yes, you can grow anything indoors. Is it going to thrive indoors? Is it going to grow like a weed? No, it's not, guys. It's just going to sit there, not do anything, because even if you put a grow light indoors, unless you have temperatures, this plant is not going to grow. So remember, the temperatures, especially night temperatures, are extremely important when growing this plant. So I think we talked about the sun, the winter, the root system, the growth structure of this plant, growing it in a container, watering, and feeding your plant. So I think we covered everything you need to know about this plant. And you also have my personal tips. If you have any additional questions, guys, you can go ahead and comment below. We grow hundreds of these plants every single year from seed. So we know a thing or two about growing this plant. It took us a few years to actually get down its growing requirements because we didn't understand for the longest time why it was not growing, especially when the day temperatures were 100 degrees. It's just because the night temperatures were not there yet, guys. And then that's it, guys. Like I said, if you have any questions, go ahead and comment below. If I missed something, just ask me and I can reply to you. And yeah, I will see you next time, guys.